Hi everyone, this is our channel Around My Story. Please like, share and subscribe.
A suspicious mind can be a gift or a curse, depending on how a person uses it. Lend me your ears and listen to my story. My name is Sasha, and I am 21 years old. I have a suspicious mind. I see an Indian behind every tree. I suspect anyone and everyone of having ulterior motives and designs. If anyone makes any claim, I will research it to determine its veracity. If anyone looks at me, my mind goes through 10 different scenarios of what scheme that person is plotting to take advantage of me. I trust no one. So as you might imagine, I don't have many friends, and I've never had a boyfriend. I just naturally assume all people are two-faced scalawags. So without further ado, I will tell you that one day I was dumbfounded when I realized that I was falling in love with my neighbor Brandon. He was a weird, introverted guy who looked and behaved just like a vampire. Data gathering, you know. I noticed that I never saw him in the daylight, only at nighttime when he went to work. Like me, he didn't have many friends, and he didn't speak much. Everyone I knew agreed that he was definitely a weirdo. But there was something about him I liked. He was my cup of tea. I explored his Facebook page and concocted silly reasons to need to talk to him. We would meet and chat on numerous occasions, and I discovered that he liked me and was watching me too. He asked me to marry him one day, and I accepted immediately. It was difficult persuading my family that he was an okay guy, but I managed to convince them. I felt that he had a mysterious streak in his character, some dark secret in his life. But I was attracted to that and was okay with it. We prepared for our wedding reception. I did errands in the mornings and he did errands in the evenings. Then night actually, came when we got married. As we spent more time together, I noticed that Brandon seemed very sensitive to bright lights. If any place were too well lit, he would make up an excuse and ask to leave. I noticed that his face was always pale. I noticed that his room at home had only a small lamp, and he liked his steaks exceedingly rare and bloody. Whenever he happened to see an injury, he would gaze hungrily at the oozing blood, just like I've seen in vampire movies. I truly wondered if he might be an actual vampire. One day I walked into his room, and when he looked up and saw me, his smile was creepy and eerie. I teased him and asked him not to hurt me, and he smiled. He offered to tell me a secret if I promised not to tell anyone. He told me that he had been hiding a dark secret for a long time, and he longed to share it with me. I held my breath. It was coming. He was going to confess to being a vampire. I was crestfallen when he instead told me that he had a rare illness that accounted for his pale face and rendered him sensitive to light. He said he was tired of keeping the secret to himself and felt relieved to have someone to share it with. I hugged him, crying, and told him that I didn't mind at all. And here I was, so sure my husband was a vampire. Am I insane or what?
I've been cursed, and it will haunt me for the rest of my life. It all began with a joke at first, but some jokes have serious consequences, and when this happens, your life becomes an uphill struggle. My name is Catherine. I'm 16 years old, and I live with my parents and my little sister Mara. I like music, acting, and watching action movies. I play baseball and practice ballet. I've even won a lot of prizes. I just had one problem. I like to make fun of people. It's like an addiction. I never watched what I said, nor did I care who it hurt. The kids I picked on were actually kind and gentle, but that just encouraged me even more. My friends were exactly like me. In fact, I was their leader. We walked like we owned the school. We had a classmate named Norman. He wasn't exactly what you'd call in good shape. He was quite the opposite of fit. During class breaks, my gang and I would steal his lunchbox and throw it around each other, keeping it away from him. We watched him run trying to catch us, but he'd stop halfway. The extra weight didn't help him, and he'd quickly run out of breath. Whenever he entered the classroom, we would surprise him by throwing old, musty vegetables and fruits at him. Norman tolerated our teasing. He didn't seem to mind much. But then, one day, a joke went a bit too far. We conceived an evil plan. We told him that there was going to be a photo contest, and the person who makes the funniest pose wins. Norman was so gullible that he believed us. He actually gave it some thought. Then he posed for us. We did our best not to burst out laughing while we took pictures for him. The next day, when he came to school, Norman discovered that his photo shoot pictures had been posted all over the classroom walls, and the kids were laughing, writing comments all over the place. Norman was mortified, and he looked around at his classmates' faces. They were all laughing and pointing at him. Norman started crying, and his nose started bleeding. Then he fainted. A teacher had to call an ambulance to take him to the hospital. I certainly didn't expect that to happen. We knew that Norman would get so fatigued sometimes and leave school for the rest of the day, but we didn't know that he had a medical condition, and I felt deep regret. The curse that I spoke of earlier began when a girl named Naomi joined our class as a new student. On her first day, our teacher brought her in and introduced her to us. She sat at the desk at the very last row. I noticed that she was always looking at me in a strange way, and I wondered why. She looked at me with disdain, and I couldn't figure out why. It was my first time meeting her, after all. I avoided her, mainly because her looks made me feel uneasy, and whenever my gang wanted to make fun of her, I told them to leave her alone. I felt there was something about this girl. One day, during science class, the teacher had paired us up to do a lab experiment, and I intended to ask her about the way she looked at me. But before I could say anything, she took the initiative and surprised me by broaching the subject herself. "You will pay for what you did to Norman," she said coldly. I looked at her and asked, "How do you know Norman? And what are you talking about?" She replied, "It doesn't matter how I know. I just do." I spent the next few days thinking about her words. Afterwards, Naomi ignored me completely. No more staring, no more accusing looks. It was as if I no longer existed to her. I didn't understand her. Then came the day. We had a basketball match. It was the championship game, but I was still busy thinking about Naomi's words. During the game, I glanced at Naomi and caught her looking at me, which distracted me. One of the players from the other team suddenly bumped into me, knocking me down and causing me to land badly on one of my knees. The pain I was in. I had to withdraw from the game to be taken to the hospital. At the hospital, the doctor said that I had torn a ligament from my knee and told me that I would need a surgery and a lot of medication. So after going through the surgery, I began taking my medications. It caused me to gain weight, even though I wasn't eating very much, just vegetables and fruits. I asked the doctor about my sudden weight gain, and he told me the medications I was taking were affecting my hormonal balance, which rarely happened, but in my case, it did. He said that I would either have to endure great pain or deal with the overweight because it wasn't going to stop. So there you have it, guys. This is the curse that Naomi cast upon me, the price I had to pay for what I did to Norman. Eventually, I got well enough to take my final exams. When I arrived at school, all my friends took one look at me and started laughing. I was now their target, their prey. One of them said, "You're as large as an elephant." "I'll lose weight once I stop taking my medications," I retorted, but no one was listening. I am now living in a nightmare, and I would like to tell Norman that I'm very, very sorry for everything that I've done.
I don't know where to begin. I don't want to live alone. I'm fed up. I need someone to talk to laugh with, to play with. I've been lonely since birth. My name is Bella, and I'm 10 years old. And this is my story. I lived with my parents in a nice, quiet neighborhood. My father was an engineer, and my mother was a housewife. Father used to travel a lot, but my mom always stayed home with me. Father was always busy. Whenever I asked him to play with me, he'd play with me for a while. Then he'd get a phone call and leave me by myself. Mother was always worried about me. She feared everything on the street, from friends to neighbors. My neighborhood didn't have any kids for me to play with. My parents used to fight a lot. I often saw Mother with her face colored blackish blue. Whenever I would ask her about it, she wouldn't reply. I didn't have any friends because Mother didn't want me to have any. I guess she was afraid they would hurt me. I don't know. One time, my parents were sitting together. and I asked Father why I didn't have any brothers or sisters. He told me to ask Mother, but Mother would just sit there silently, without answering. Later, there came a time when Father grabbed Mother and began beating her. I tried to pull him away from her, screaming, "Leave her alone! Let her go!" He slapped me hard, and I fell down. The last thing I heard before I lost consciousness was my mom screaming. I woke up later in the hospital to see my mom crying. She asked me if I was okay, and I nodded. When we returned home, my father wasn't there. I asked Mom where he was, but she simply said that he left on a very long business trip. I was feeling a little sad, but Mom surprised me with a doll. This was the first time that Mom had ever given me a doll. She said that doll would be like my little sister. I hugged it tightly and said to it, "Nancy, you and I are going to be the best sisters ever." Mom often left me with Nancy when she had to go out to do business. It was okay though. I felt that Nancy could understand me whenever I spoke to her. Time passed quickly. One day, Mom came home tired and went to sleep on the couch. I made a tent in my room where I collected all of my toys and played with Nancy. I was speaking to Nancy and telling her how beautiful she was and how I felt lucky to have her as a sister. Then I asked her, "Nancy, do you know why Father left us?" Miraculously, Nancy answered me, saying, "Father left you because he never really loved you to begin with." I was shocked and took 2 steps back. Then I said with a trembling voice, "Nancy, you can speak?" Nancy answered and said, "Of course. Can't all dolls?" From that moment on, Nancy and I lived in our own private little world. We didn't let anyone know about this. It was our secret. Once, when we were sitting alone, Nancy said to me, "Bella, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" I asked. Then she said the strangest thing. "You have to leave this world because you deserve a better one." That didn't make sense. Actually, it felt more like a threat. It frightened me, and I called for Mom. When she came in, I told her what Nancy had just said to me. She replied saying, "Nonsense, Bella. Nancy is just a doll. She can't talk. Maybe you're just tired. Get some sleep." So I tried to sleep, but Nancy wouldn't let me sleep. She left me alone until midnight, then she woke me up. She put her hand over my mouth and whispered, "Please listen to me. Don't scream, okay?" she said. "I know all your fears, your father's cruelty, your loneliness, your love for me, how your love and belief in me transformed me from a toy to a sentient doll. I really love you, Bella, and I want you to be happy." Her words calmed me down, and I said, "You're right, Nancy. So what do we do then?" She explained her plan to me. "In 2 days' time, we'll run away from home to a place called Toyland, where we'll meet some great friends." Whenever Mom was busy with work, I would speak and laugh with Nancy, and whenever Mom would enter the room and ask me who I was speaking to, I would laugh and point at Nancy. I could see in Mom's eyes that she was beginning to worry about me. One day, as Nancy and I were preparing our stuff to escape, we were looking at a map we had prepared. Then, unexpectedly, Mom came into the room. She saw the map and asked me about it. I looked at Nancy, and she gestured with her eyes that I shouldn't say anything. Seeing this, Mom took Nancy and threw her into the trash can. I screamed and pleaded. That was all I remember.
A teacher earns the respect of his students and also serves as an exemplary role model. Unfortunately, student adoration of teachers is on the wane in society now. Students owe teachers some degree of loyalty for contributing to their success in life. But what if you discovered that your teacher was on the run from the law? How would you feel? Would you want to know? Lend an ear to my story. I am Erica, and I am 17 years old. I live with my parents and my sister Felicia. My lifelong dream was to excel in all areas of life. I did well in school, and my parents noticed my stellar intellect from an early age. So they encouraged and supported my education in every way. I loved and respected all the teachers who ever taught me. I respected them for their efforts, and I took a dim view of my fellow students who didn't respect them. I even respected the teachers who taught me unimportant subjects. Though I respected all my teachers, past and present, I hadn't yet found any worthy of being a good role model for me to follow until one day a new chemistry teacher, Mr. Franklin, came to our school when our previous teacher resigned to travel abroad with her family. From the very first moment when he first entered the classroom, I was charmed by his charisma. He seemed quiet, self-confident, and venerable. But it wasn't just me. All the students were impressed by his presence. His explanations were much clearer than our previous teachers. With every passing day, I loved him more and more. I had chosen a good role model. I was amazed by his resume qualifications and his erudition and experience. I liked to chat with him on breaks to benefit from his experience, wisdom, and insights. He never indicated that I was an annoyance to him. Instead, he welcomed all my questions openly and cheerfully and shared his knowledge freely. I didn't want to let him down, so I studied very hard. He was so worldly and street smart that we nicknamed him the Thug because he seemed to know exactly how the world operated and how to get around obstacles. We figured he was either an alien from space or a thug wanted by the law. Then one day while browsing the internet, I came upon a strange coincidence. I read about an intelligent serial killer who committed brutal crimes without leaving a trace. Some witnesses had seen him and described him to the police. The resultant face sketches looked exactly like Mr. Franklin, as if he had a twin brother. The first thought that came into my mind was that this was one weird coincidence. When I went to school the next day, I showed him the news article and the sketch of the serial killer. When he saw the sketch, his features darkened. He asked me where I had read this news, and I told him that it was from a news website. He agreed that the similarity between him and the sketch was uncanny, but he seemed unconcerned, disinterested even. I was wondering if Mr. Franklin were to be the killer, what his motivation for killing might be. The next few days strengthened my suspicions when I heard about a murder in our neighborhood, which coincided with a time when Mr. Franklin was not at school. When he subsequently returned to school, he looked worried and nervous. If he were the killer, why would he risk coming back to school? I then began to consider that he might be planning to kill me because I knew his dirty little secret. I had trouble for sleeping for the next few days. Then one day after visiting one of my friends, I was walking home when I sensed that someone was following me. I began walking more quickly, and the footsteps sped up proportionately. Suddenly, I felt a touch on my shoulder. I spun around to see Mr. Franklin. He gestured for me not to speak. I nodded okay. He then told me that he has a brother named Rodriguez, who was actually the serial killer that I had shown him in the news article. He said his brother followed him everywhere to torment him and cause trouble for him. He told me that he had to leave the city, and I was very sad to hear that. He hoped that we would meet again someday. After his disappearance from school, my mind was full of questions. Was he telling the truth? Was he truly innocent? I hope I find out the answers to my questions someday.
Some people are born to have great destinies, like being a famous scientist like Einstein or a famous actor or athlete. Other people are born to enjoy great things like love, riches, or glamour. And then there are the rest of us, those who struggle all their lives just to eke by. If we should by chance latch on to a great opportunity, it will likely be very difficult to hold on to it long enough for success. We can only take our best shot, or give up and not even try. My story is about a hero. Perhaps you have met, made fun of, or loved someone like him at one time or another in the past. My name is Sam, and I am 17 years old. I live with my parents and my twin brother, Randy. Dad was a carpenter, and Mom was a housewife, but Randy is the real hero of my story. You see, he was autistic. Unfortunately, society attaches a stigma to autistic children because they seem to live in their own little world, in a kind of private self-isolation, as if quarantined from life. Due to our family's poverty and lack of access to good medical care, we never even realized that Randy was autistic. We just thought he was introverted and naturally quiet and withdrawn. I was the exact opposite, extroverted and gregarious. For the most part, we left Randy to his own devices in facing his hard life in his early childhood. When Randy and I were young, we would play in the street, and I would be responsible for protecting him because there were also some children that considered him weird and, consequently, mocked him a lot. I thought of him as a little angel because he was so quiet, and he was such a dreamer. He loved music and would often close his eyes while listening to music. He would mimic a musician playing a musical instrument for an admiring audience. I would watch his face while he was listening to music. His facial expression would change from sad to euphoric. So I saved up some money and surprised him on his birthday by presenting him with an MP3 player. He was overjoyed. One day when I was outside, Mom asked Randy to buy her some necessities from the supermarket. So he wore some earbuds so he could listen to his MP3 hands-free on his way to the supermarket. Along the way, he came across some bullies who knew about his quirky personality condition, and they decided to bully him. The gang leader grabbed Randy's MP3, threw it on the ground, and crushed it under his foot, much to the amusement of his laughing gang members. Randy was devastated and ran home crying. When he got home, Mom asked him what was wrong, but he didn't answer. When I returned home, Mom told me about Randy, so I knocked on his door. When he opened it, I saw that he had a black eye. I asked him what had happened, and he told me. I promised to buy him another MP3. One day, I heard live music playing at school, so I entered a room to see where it was coming from. It was from Randy. He was playing a violin that someone had left in the room. He looked at me, but I gestured for him to continue playing, and he did. I was entranced by his wonderful, graceful melody. When he finished, I clapped enthusiastically for him and asked him where he learned to play music. He told me that this was his first time playing music. Wow! I decided to help him develop his fabulous talent, so I told our music teacher about Randy. When I returned home, I searched the internet to learn how to make him a violin. I watched many videos and was able to make a homemade violin in Dad's workshop. Our teacher decided to allow Randy to enter the school's music contest. When I gave Randy my violin as a gift, he cried and hugged me. When he started playing the violin at home, Mom was incredulous. She hugged him and cried tears of joy upon discovering that he had such talent. On the day of the music contest, several students were laughing at him as he was walking to the auditorium, but I encouraged him to ignore them and resolved to do his best. Once he started playing, the whole auditorium went quiet and still. After a while, I could see some students actually crying due to the slow, sad, seesaw strokes on his violin strings. When he finished, he received a thunderous standing ovation. He was clearly amazed at the audience's reaction, and he cried tears of happiness and pride. Afterwards, I hugged him, and he hugged me back. Randy still has a long road to hoe in life, but Mom, Dad, and I will be there to support him on his way to the top.
Hi there, I'm Carl and I'm 19 years old. I live with my grandpa on his farm on the outskirts of the city. Grandpa is fond of nature and quietude, as these calm his soul and spirit. He loves cultivating flowers and is very skilled in this field. He reads numerous books on unusual species of flowers, including their planting and growing requirements. He can also extract perfume fragrances from flowers. At first, I didn't care about this hobby of his and viewed it as a waste of time. However, after talking with him many times at length and listening to his myriad descriptions of the beauty of nature and flowers, I became hooked on them myself. Now I am as passionate as he is about them, and I love to study and learn about exotic and rare flowers. One of Grandpa's friends happened to be a botanist. He could talk for hours about rare flowers, even imaginary ones depicted in science fiction movies. One evening after he had visited our home and left, we went into the kitchen to prepare dinner when suddenly there came a knock at our front door. I answered the door, but no one was there. Nothing save a small box with a card, which I dutifully carried to Grandpa. The card said simply, "A gift from a dear friend." So we opened the box to find some strange seeds that were unlike any that Grandpa had ever seen before. He read another part of the note. "This is a Yasni flower from the future. Get ready for a fantastical, unforgettable trip." We didn't really believe this silly message, but we decided, what the heck, let's plant them and see what happens. In just 3 days, the seeds had produced exotic-looking purple flowers. Grandpa plucked one to extract some perfume from it. It had a wonderfully fragrant smell. Suddenly, I felt enervated and listless. My vision blurred, I couldn't breathe, and I became dizzy and passed out. When I opened my eyes, I was in the middle of some unknown desert. There were unfamiliar-looking parked cars with people in unfamiliar-looking clothes. One of the strangers pointed at me in alarm and shouted, "Catch him!" I ran, but they surrounded me and caught me. They bound my hands and hung me from a horizontal tent frame. I heard a groan and looked to my left to see Grandpa, similarly bound and hanging from another tent frame. The strangers were speaking in a language I had never heard before. Their apparent leader came over to us and said, "See this desert? The entire world is like this. Because of you. You destroyed our world. Our future is dark and bleak now. Those Yasni flowers you planted ended up breeding out of control and destroyed the world. You need to pay for your foul deeds." Suddenly, I heard a gunshot. Someone had shot Grandpa in the chest. He was bleeding profusely and appeared to be unconscious or dead. I couldn't tell which. I screamed, and then the shooter came towards me with hatred blazing in his eyes. He stopped and placed his gun barrel to my forehead. I screamed, "No!" and closed my eyes tightly. After a pause and hearing no shot, I opened my eyes to find myself lying on the floor beside Grandpa, the plucked flower lying between us. I woke him up and told him about my dream and found that he had had the exact same dream. He called his botanist friend and described the seeds, the flower, and its fragrance to him. The botanist said the unknown flower sounded similar to one that grew high in the Swiss Alps. It was illegal to import because it was known to induce hallucinations and cause other unpredictable reactions in people. To this day, we have no idea who the dear friend was that sent us these unusual hallucinogenic flowers. We figure it must have been someone's idea of a practical joke. Or were these Yasni flowers indeed sent to us from the future?